This video contains full spoilers for Made in Abyss, also a content warning. There will be brief discussions of lolicon towards the end of this video, and an extremely brief discussion of sexual assault. Also, apologies for audio quality. My laptop just would not work with me when I was recording this. This is my third try. Tourist is a common word used to denote a visiting foreigner, either foreign to the region or the country itself, going to said country with the intention of sightseeing. A tourist is someone who visits somewhere for leisure, on holiday or vacation, and stays at a place temporarily. They might be unfamiliar with the local culture, language, and people, but could be interested in learning more. So when I saw it cropping up in relation to a manga I was familiar with, I was confused. I took a great amount of interest in it and decided to investigate what on earth it meant. See, as I learned, there is a secondary definition of the word, a terminally online definition, that is used to describe people who generally take a different interpretation of a piece of art, either negative or positive. Now, it's not a widely used term so far as I can see. In fact, I had to scroll a bit on Urban Dictionary before I found the definition in this context, but in my defense, the first several definitions were exact definitions of the word tourist, i.e. holidaymaker, and literal, genuine definitions aren't really what the Urban Dictionary is supposed to be about, so we're not counting those. Instead, I take the topmost relevant definition by a user named Sadly, posted on April 8th, 2023, as the documented definition of a tourist, albeit from an extremely subjective point of view, so take this with a pinch of salt. Sadly defined a tourist as a person who joins a community for the sake of policing others in the community, as though they are senior/knowledgeable in the community. Usually shown to have no idea about the community, sometimes they actively push original members away from the community. Now, Sadly cites an example of Takeshi and Kazu. I don't know who Takeshi and Kazu are, presumably the titular characters of the anglicized Takeshi's Castle, but in this definitions example, Sadly asserts three things about tourists. Number one, this definition explicitly states that the individual doesn't know the community and by extension implies that they do not know the media itself. Number two, that by having a different interpretation, the individual cannot possibly have understood the original material, and 3. The definition also states explicitly that the presence of tourists forces out others from the community as a direct result of the tourist and their quote-unquote incorrect interpretations. Bottom line, unwelcome, disrespectful, and disruptive. Now, this is just one person's definition, but what we can glean from this concept is that it's a word used to discredit an alternative opinion. Interpreting couples as LGBT+ is just one fringe example. Rather, tourist is typically used to discredit criticism either of the show itself or of tropes within it, especially criticism of harmful tropes, ones that are racist or sexist, for example. Often adopted by hardcore fans of the series, the term tourist is a brand of idiocy stamped upon anybody with whom they disagree, and I was seeing it used a lot with Made in Abyss specifically. I wonder why. Made in Abyss saw its debut in October 2012 as a webcomic by an author named Akihito Tsukushi. He's a good artist with a small selection of works available for browsing on his Wikipedia page, but this is his first proper big piece that saw international acclaim. Made in Abyss focuses on the journey of a small group of characters into the Abyss, a mysterious chasm that stretches deep down into the crust of the earth, 20,000 meters below sea level at least, and the horrors within. It's good. It's very good. Seeing a TV series air in 2017, Made in Abyss then followed with a small trilogy of films, Journey's Dawn, Wandering Twilight, and Dawn of the Deep Soul, the latter of which was released in 2020. These were shortly followed by Season 2, The Golden City of the Scorching Sun, which was released in 2022. It's almost completely caught up to the manga, which has definitely stalled in progress recently. I mean, it's no Game of Thrones. The most recent chapter, Chapter 67, went up in February 2024, but before that it was most recently updated in July 2023. So yeah, it's slow going. I've read the manga at least 3 times now. I binge it, forget about it, and then return a few years later to kind of check on how it's doing. It will be done one day, I hope. The depths of the abyss do need to be explored. Still, it's not for everyone, and I do mean that. Made in Abyss features some depictions that I'll discuss as this video continues that are, bluntly, a bit fucking weird. Not much is is known about Akihito beyond his apparently proud self-identification as a lolicon, a word that, if searched on Google, will net you an explicit warning from the search engine that exploring further can result in prosecution, and a previous rumor that he had been arrested. It wasn't him, it turned out to be another mangaka. But yeah, I often joke that he will be writing the ending of this comic from prison. With its bright colours and heartwarming messages of motivation and friendship being magic, anime, as a genre, has a reputation outside of its actual viewership as being just cartoons, often for children. Still, anyone who's dipped their toes into this genre knows this judgment to be completely incorrect. Animes featuring dark topics are hardly rare. Several of the biggest animes of all time take us to the darkest places. I mean, just off the top of my head, Full Metal Alchemist, Attack on Titan, D. Greyman, the latter being a personal favourite, inject concepts that will have you thinking about them years later. And those are just mainstream examples. Dip below the surface and you'll learn that the cutesy cartoon art style is often a facade. My favourite manga is Franken Fran, but long-time viewers of my channel will know that I am an absolute slut for Junji Ito. The more disgusting the better, sign me up. Manga and anime are, as art forms, just as capable of delivering true horror as any other medium. And that's why I've wanted to talk about Made in Abyss for a very long time. I enjoy Made in Abyss. I think it's got one of the most unique concepts I've ever seen. It covers themes that interest me, growing up, the loss of innocence, change and transition. It's also gratuitously gory and difficult to read. Akihito doesn't shy away from putting these characters through the meat grinder, occasionally literally, with body horror abound, and real horror. Christ. The story is fantastic, and I mean, at time of writing there's no ending, and I have no idea how it will end, but I'm on the edge of my seat. The characters are so fantastic, inspiring, unique. The innocent chibi art style perfectly contrasts with the horrendous horror visuals, but there is just one thing that ruins it. I don't know a single person I would recommend this show to on the basis that I would be deeply ashamed for them to make it 7 minutes into episode 2, or hey, a few scrolls into chapter 2, only to be faced with some of the visuals Akihito felt fit to include, clearly for viewer titillation. Looking into the eye of another human being and being like, oh yeah, I mean I like it, but not for that, sounds like the social equivalent of setting myself on fire. This isn't a show you can recommend. So why do I want to discuss it, and what do I want to talk about? I want to explain to you the story by way of unpacking the themes. I want to pick apart each difficult moment, examine the horror, and mine this franchise for the good shit. If you're curious enough to go and read it for yourself, there is a cleaned up version available on Reddit that I'll link in the description if you're interested in reading the story without any of the creepy gratuity up to chapter 43. Secondarily, I want to show you how much I appreciate the world building and the story of this show, and give it the credit it deserves in the context of a video essay, because I do like it, and I want you to see how much I like it. But also, thirdly, I want to demonstrate to you why this media doesn't need gross lolicon visuals cropping up out of nowhere for it to be impactful or uncomfortable. They're not that common, but when they hit, they are disgusting. I want to explain why the "it's about a loss of innocence" argument is a load of shit. I want to show you why this media would be improved in their absence. I want to demonstrate to you how arguments about the lolicon imagery drown any legitimate good faith discussions that could stem from this franchise, both inside and outside of the fandom. If you talk to somebody who's heard of this, guarantee that's all they'll know it for. Pedo bait cringe. The larvae that eat you alive on level 4, the human shells Bondrewd uses to pass between levels 5 and 6, the cannibalism of Iriyuumi and her cursed children. I doubt you've heard of them, but you should. So let's get into it. Made in Abyss begins in the fictional town of Orth, a kind of old-timey era gas lanterns and pulley systems mining town on a small island out in the middle of the ocean. Orth took root on this particular island because of a massive fucking gaping abyss that some explorers found there 100 or so years ago. An abyss of unknown depth full of treasures and terrifying deadly creatures and alien flora and fauna. In fact, the abyss stretches well beyond 20,000 6,000 meters below sea level. Compared to the Marianas Trench, which reaches depths of 11,000 meters, this is a big hole, and that's just the depth they know. The abyss is formed of several layers or levels, with 1 being at the top and 7 being the lowest known level, each with their own distinct biomes and dangers. While the 7th level has been explored, no explorers, known in this universe as delvers, have ever returned from the 7th level to tell the tale. Is it because it's dangerous? Most likely, but actually there's more to the abyss than meets the eye. Early on into the series, we are introduced to the curse of the abyss. The further down you go, the harder it is to get back up out of it, and without some disgusting workarounds we'll discuss later, it is impossible to return from the 6th layer without dying. The abyss works like a Chinese finger trap. Getting into it is easy, you just move downwards, anybody can do that, carnivorous creatures notwithstanding. The entire time you are slipping through invisible membranes. So when you try to move up, you come into conflict with those membranes from beneath and find them to, in a sense, be barbed. Even rising just a few meters on level 5 can cause gratuitous bodily harm, and it takes time and practice to adjust to the abyss to allow for frequent movement in and out. In fact, you need to be qualified to enter the abyss at all. People preparing to become delvers are given little bells to wear around their necks. Red whistles are given to apprentice delvers who are permitted access to level 1. Blue whistles are able to access level 2. Purple whistles, or moon whistles as the translated manga calls them, can access up to level 4. Black whistles can head through to level 5, and white whistles, the legendary few, can go wherever they want. Often this leads them beyond level 5, a so-called final dive, from which there is no expected return, into the bowels of levels 6 and 7 and whatever lies beyond. However, not all delvers operate with the expectation of going on an intrepid suicide mission. Mostly they hunt for relics, technology of a long-lost civilization, individual items each with unique purposes. These are often sold to the military or kept locked up back in Orth, although many white whistles keep what they find for themselves, as anyone reasonably would if you found a barb that you could plug into your arm to give you the strength of 2,000 men. It is in this world we meet Rico, a young orphan at the Belchero orphanage in the city of Orth. Rico is sweet and excitable. Like so many others, she is drawn to the abyss. She studies it intently, soaking up information about what lies within. She takes part in expeditions into the first layer with her fellow orphans in search of the aforementioned relics, and she talks about it incessantly. Because, my friends, Rico is being exploited.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
Akihito Tsukushi is a fairly subtle writer. Yes, writer. His art is anything but his written world-building ability is expert. Over-explanation is a common trope in manga. This need for the writer to make sure their reader is aware of every nuance taking place in an individual moment, and while it's a pitfall Akihito occasionally falls into, he is certainly one of the more subtle writers I've encountered for the best reasons. It doesn't take an eagle-eyed viewer to realize early on that every single delver that ever feels the need to discuss their upbringing is an orphan. Rico lives in an orphanage, sure, so that skews the results a bit, but one thing the Abyss seems to be spectacularly talented at is murder. Delvers are raised in the orphanage, they descend through the Abyss, ascend through their whistle ranks, meet each other, have babies, then die. The babies are then left to be raised by the orphanage as delvers, fed this grand idea of the glory of the Abyss, a glory hole perhaps, and the cycle starts all over again. There are a few ways we see this manifest, most obviously through the child labour that is used day in and day out in Orth. Children under the age of 15 are red whistles, only becoming eligible for promotion to blue whistle at age 15, marking the age of 15 not only as a formative year, but also diminishing the skills and contributions of the red whistles by limiting them to a rank determined not by skill, but by age. Drawing parallels to real life, this is like having minimum wages determined by age. Currently in the UK, the minimum wage for those under 18 is £5.28. 8. This rises to £7.49 at age 18, £10.18 at 21, and a whopping £10.42 at age 23. But say I go to a burger place and I order a burger, I'm not going to be getting a product that varies in difference. I'm not paying less for a burger that's worse because it's been made by a teenager. I pay the same. More of that money is just not going to the person making the burger. The value of the relic output is roughly the same until levels 4 and 5, but the marker of the red whistle indicates the arbitrary value of the individual themselves placed upon them by their government, something that they have no control over. We see this during the aforementioned return procession for Delvers. Rico and Reg are told to throw flowers, and they're called useless brats when they fail to do so quickly enough. They are merely drones for Orth and its government, and the adults of Made in Abyss have a track record of treating red whistles, more specifically children, like shit. As it stands, the relics found by these children are handed into the orphanage and then sold onwards to the military, who use their collection of relics to intimidate foreign militaries into not attacking them. But foreign powers also enter the Abyss and collect their own relics, so the arms race continues to the point of it being a constant stream of background noise, almost entirely irrelevant. The noise that they are fed, however, is triumphant. Returning patrols of Delvers from as far down as the 5th layer are met with parades, thrown flowers, and music. The heroes of the town are the Delvers, yet these returns are simultaneously celebrations and funerals, for which, quite hauntingly, the same flowers are thrown. This is the flower of resilience, the flower of eternal fortune, which can grow anywhere in any soil. It has a deceptive reputation as a luck-bringing flower, the flower of Orth, and as we learn in level 4, this is as deceptive as the processions they're thrown over. With each patrol, a new group of orphans is created, a new collection of relics are hauled into the light of day, and dreams of glory and grandeur are implanted into another child's mind. We see this implicitly in so many of Rico's attitudes. After killing a beast that they found feasting on the dead body of another Delver, Rico comments that the animals kill the Delvers, then we hunt those animals for food. We serve that food at Belchero Orphanage, and so the strength of the Delvers that died is passed on to us. We become strong as we eat them, which, as we can see from Reg's shock, is an interesting thing to teach children, even by the standards of the Abyss. Children attempting to keep relics for themselves is forbidden. Consequently, orphans are fed into the 1st and later the 2nd level of the Abyss to collect mystical doodads for a faceless military, never to receive recognition or monetary compensation for their work, whilst fed propaganda all the while. It's mentioned in whichever chapter introduces the Tumble Tavern that blue whistles do not make enough money fetching relics that they need second jobs in order to survive. They pay for the relics, the value of the Abyss, with their own bodies and lives, which are consequently fed back into the Abyss in a stream of transactions its denizens aren't even aware are taking place. And yes, that is going to be relevant. Is the Abyss alive? I don't know. I think so, but not in the conventional way that we might assume. The in-universe song of Iriyuumi describes the Abyss as, though not truly the same, it imitates breathing in and out, which gives the impression of life in some abstract eldritch way whereby it is living, but not really all that aware of the humans scrambling up and down its walls like ants. In fact, if we consider the shape of the Abyss, coupled with the fact that the Abyss's 7th layer resembles that diagram of a cervix I got shown at my last smear test, it might be more relevant to suggest crabs than ants, perhaps, or a bunch of two-legged sperm all fighting their way towards some egg kept deep under the surface. Am I joking? I don't think I'm joking anymore, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the direction we took, even allegorically. See, the themes of motherhood don't so much permeate the stories of Made in Abyss as they do just wave in your face, too obvious not to notice in some cases. Rico, our protagonist, is the daughter of Liza the Annihilator, a white whistle who was forced to embark into the Abyss during her pregnancy. This resulted in the death of Rico's father, Talker, and Rico's own tragic stillbirth after months of heavy expeditions into the hostile depths. Yet Rico was resurrected, not by Liza, not by her friend and fellow white whistle Ozen, but by the Abyss itself. Having found a curse-repelling relic, this monolithic block of white stone, Ozen placed Rico's body in there so that she could be transported back to the surface abyss to be buried. Only the relic resurrected her, and Rico was sent back to the surface alive, quite literally made in abyss. A baby emerging from a big hole, birthed from the earth in an immaculate conception, has its own set of connotations, especially when you look at the fleshy mass within the relic itself. That is a big, meaty hole if I've ever seen one. But that's not the only mother-daughter relationship we see by a long shot. Just to name a few, most of these will be names that you don't recognize, but we'll get there. Rico and the Abyss, Rico and Liza, Liza and Ozen, Ozen and loosely Maruruk, whose name is too hard to say, so I just call them Maruk, Vweko and Iriyuumi, Iriyuumi and her many children, Iriyuumi and Fapta, so on. In contrast, we've only seen one properly explored father-daughter relationship in the series so far. In comparison to the relatively healthy mother-daughter relationships on show in Made in Abyss, Akihito writes fatherly bonds that are fundamentally exploitative and are more often a cause for concern, most specifically Bondrewd and Proshka, who, believe me, we will cover in depth. Bondrewd and any child, actually. I still cry when I read those chapters. These relationships reach the explicit extremes of exploitation in some cutaways, calling back to our content warning at the start of this video, such as when we see brief flashbacks to the foster father of a woman named Vweko, who assaulted her so violently as a very young girl that she was made infertile. Fathers do not come off fantastically in Akihito's writing, often offering a starkly cruel contrast to the way he writes the unconditional self-sacrificing love between mothers and daughters. I'd really like to discuss that theme now, but considering I've just thrown about 30 names at you that you will not remotely recognize, we'll come back to it later as a final overarching discussion. Instead, we will focus on smaller analyses so that I can do that thing where I really seamlessly introduce you to characters and ideas without it being way too much in one go. You're welcome. Instead, let's focus on something a bit more simple. Psych. Sorry, we're getting biblical. So for anyone looking to divine meaning from Made in Abyss, I imagine that Inferno was a pretty standard place to start, at least for me. It's just a very obvious parallel to make, so let's make it. Inferno was a poem written in the 14th century by a fellow named Dante Alighieri, an Italian poet, writer and philosopher, in which he chronicles his fictional journey through hell alongside his ghostly guide Virgil. He also wrote Purgatorio and Paradiso, which focused on his journeys through Purgatory and Paradise respectively, but these weren't adapted into brilliant PS3 games like Inferno was, so unfortunately we won't be giving them the time of day today. Anyway, as you can see from this corporate Memphis Inferno diagram I dug up from the first result on Google Images, reference in description, the Abyss features some extremely clear visual similarities to Dante's version of hell, but most importantly, it implies some very difficult things lie on the horizon. Corporate Memphis Hell features 9 distinct layers, but like with the diagram of our Abyss, Limbo is also countered even if no one is necessarily suffering there. Limbo doesn't sound too bad, all things considered. It's for the unbaptized and the virtuous pagans, people who weren't sinful enough to actually be damned to hell. Instead, it's a city where people live in grief because they are outside of God's grace, which probably does suck, I'm sure, but only a few floors down we have people trapped in burning coffins, never able to die, so I do think we need to maintain a bit of perspective. Still, this is similar to Orth, where the denizens of said city feel the effects of the Abyss, they are drawn to the Abyss, they delve into it and live off what it provides, but they never reach the grace at the bottom. In Dante's story, you suffer until the day of reckoning, but as a living person, he just brute forces it and finds the hatch down by Satan, getting out to purgatory that way. In Made in Abyss, the Abyss itself is treated like a god. It's worshipped. Skeletons line the inner walls in the same praying pose. It has been worshipped for thousands of years by the civilizations that rose and fell before Orth was founded, 100 years prior to the story beginning. And like with Limbo, Orth exists to shelter those that are too scared to reach out to God, or whatever it is that lies beneath them. This is a journey that Rico embarks upon with open arms, beginning her quest into the Abyss and descending alongside her guide Reg. Unlike Virgil, however, Reg has miraculously personally lost his memory, and he is not a ghostly poet but a robot, still there is more to him than meets the eye. We learn, for example, that he knew Liza and travelled to the surface on her request to find Rico. Now, there are a few similarities between the layers of hell and the abyss, but not enough for it to be a serious allegory. Sure, the Sea of Corpses of level 5 definitely draws parallels to the River Styx of the Fifth Circle, especially when you consider that said River Styx is full of the bodies of sinners, a Sea of Corpses, but the Fifth Circle houses wrathful sinners, and the similarities fall apart there. Bondrewd is wrathful, sure, but he has done far worse than that. The blustering winds of the Forest of Temptation link mechanically and by name to the second circle of lust, which is full of blustering winds that throw sinners around, but there's nothing else about that second layer that calls back to this connection. More loosely, the Cup of Giants could be related metaphorically to the concept of greed, but this, alongside the other names for the other abyssal layers, leads me to believe more that there was an original idea for Maiden Abyss that ended up being scrapped, wherein Rico would face trials linked to the 7 layers of hell. Like, the differences are just too many. For example, Dante wasn't born in hell, whereas Rico was born in the abyss. The layers of hell only contain relics for collection in that aforementioned PS3 game, so again, that's not really a comparison to make. Still, we also have a character named Ozen the Immovable, who the gang meet on the second layer. I initially considered that title to be unusual. I always assumed it related to her incredible strength, but wow, what a specific title. As it turns out, the unmoved mover is a concept developed by Aristotle of an entity that moves other things but is not moved in turn, and I'll be honest, I tried to wrap my head around the concept and I struggled. The unmoved mover is a theological argument in which God is supposed to exist by saying that all things are in motion. You roll a ball, it's in motion from you, you're in motion because the earth is spinning because of gravity, etc. And whatever the first thing is not in motion, which is the beginning of the chain, which is God. This was later picked up by Thomas Aquinas, who chronicled his assumptions on 5 ways that the existence of God could be proven, the first being motion. Aquinas had a quick cameo in Paradiso too, so we can assume that Dante was familiar with his work, because later William O'Grady of the St. John's Review applied this concept to Dante's travels through hell. Grady pointed out, and to quote directly from Wikipedia for the sake of simplicity, that those frozen in the ice perversely imitate God in the sense of being unmoved movers, but rather than moving by attracting us towards them, they move us by repelling us away from them, as evil was understood to do so in scholastic philosophy. Thus, since they wanted to be God, Dante makes them godlike but at the furthest distance removed from God. If Ozen's concept stems from that of an unmoved mover, does that imply that she perversely imitates God? Does it shed a light on her evil nature? Does that also in turn imply that the magnetism of the abyss leads Rico towards a deity? And what does that say for the rest of the White Whistles, who all want to be gods in their own right? There's a lot you could dig into, but I don't know how worthwhile it is. There are clearly some crumbs in Maiden Abyss that lead us to make parallels with Dante's Divine Comedy. However, in my interpretation, this was a foundational idea that evolved over time until it was similar in concept only. But how similar will it stay? That abyss map never shows us what's at the bottom, and following our potentially parallel concept, it could be Satan waiting there. In the Circle of Treachery, the 9th Circle of Hell, Satan waits, embedded in the ice at the core of the planet. Here, he is surrounded by the worst kind of sinner, people who commit treachery. Some are frozen solid in ice, but some, notably Brutus and Judas, are in Satan's mouth, being chewed on like gummy bears for all of eternity. But this is apparently where Liza is waiting for Rico. Is Liza the Annihilator our Satan? Is she our Brutus? Or something else entirely? Is she the torturer, the tortured? And what does that mean for Rico? Quite notably, a later character named Wazukyan, who, to coin a TikTok phrase, unalives at the end of the... Nah, I'm joking, don't worry. He fucking dies. He speaks to Reg briefly on his deathbed. Something more frightening than an unmet dream awaits you at the end of the Golden Path, he warns. At the very least, try to make your dreams a reality. and abandon hope. Even for a dying speech, Wazukan's words take an unusually sober tone for a manga that doesn't typically have its characters spouting philosophy with a glass of whiskey in hand. Tonally, his speech was unusual. Why? I feel very strongly that Tsukushi was writing as explicitly as he could here. Is this speech a reference to Paradise Lost? Most specifically the lines, "Farewell hope, and with hope farewell fear, farewell remorse, all good to me is lost, evil be thou my good," or, more likely, is Wazukan making reference to the infamous warning transcribed over the gates of hell in Dante's work, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here"? It's probably not important. We are introduced to a character named Bondrewd in chapter 24. He is referenced before this point, but this is when the story begins to properly explore who he is and what kind of fresh hell he's bringing. He's known as the Lord of Dawn, and he is one of the most prolific white whistles in Made in Abyss, lending further associations with the Divine Comedy, being that the name Lucifer is often translated as the Dawnbringer or Lightbringer. He is the first major antagonist of this story, unless you want to count an incredibly angry hedgehog on level 4. He is first mentioned by Ozan, a woman who isn't exactly kind to the children of Orth when they visit. After beating the fuck out of Reg and Rico in an excessive display of sadistic glee, Ozan warns them that, compared to her, Bondrewd is a bastard, and not to get too wrapped up in his business. Bondrewd has top-level shithouse written all over him from the moment he walks in. No one that dresses like a gothic Victorian panini press has any place on the good guys list, but it's almost impossible to guess at a glance just how much of a bastard this man is going to be. Bondrewd is the exploitation of the orphans of Orth personified. In flashbacks, we see him climbing to the surface specifically to conscript a bunch of orphaned children for work down below. This includes two characters that Rico and Reg meet during their time on level 4, Nanachi and Mitty, whose association with Made in Abyss is as universally recognised as it is pitied. They're safe now-ish, tucked away in a sweet little hideout on a corner of level 4, but not without a crippling case of PTSD. Many years previously, Nanachi and Mitty were lured down to the 5th level by Bondrewd with promises of exciting adventure. It was here that Mitty and Nanachi found themselves on the Ido front, the epicenter of Bondrewd's scientific bullshit and a graveyard of dreams. Yet, if you look at the trivia section on the fandom page for Bondrewd, you will see a completely unsubstantiated bullet point that reads, "Despite his actions, Bondrewd does honestly love children." Holy headcanon, Batman! Who in the fanfiction decided that was true? I saw a few jokes here and there on the Made in Abyss subreddit about the ooification of Bondrewd in fanworks, and while I don't care about your personal headcanons, you cannot be stating that as a fact on the closest thing our boy has to a Wikipedia page. No, Bondrewd may appear to love children, as do many people who exploit them, but rather he has understood a concept in the Made in Abyss universe known as Haku, the shape of the soul, the highest manifestation of value. See, orphaned children in the city of Orth rarely possess a bond that connects them to others, especially the ones he herds in off the streets, whereas other children's Haku might be their parents or friends, a complication that would require those parents and friends to be present for Bondrewd's experiments. These homeless, unsupervised, vulnerable orphans have nothing but simple dreams and aspirations. Their Haku is discreet, individual to them, and without complication. We see this in Mitty, who dreams of becoming a white whistle delver, and later Prushka, a child Bondrewd raises as his daughter, pretending to love and nurture her specifically with the end goal of making himself her Haku, knowing that he will be able to harvest the bond they share. And why is Haku so important to Bondrewd? Because in chapter 23, we learn how exactly one might return from the 6th layer of the Abyss, by sacrificing your Haku. Through lengthy experimentation, Bondrewd found that by placing 2 bonded individuals in 2 adjoining pods and lowering them into the Abyss, he could force one of them to shoulder the curse of the 6th layer for the other. This would cause what is delicately described by many characters as a loss of humanity, but the reality is far more difficult to watch. As Bondrewd recounts, this transfer of the curse doesn't work if the curse curse is transferred to an animal. It must be a human. Nor does it work if the two humans don't know each other. They need to know each other, they need to care deeply for each other. There needs to be Haku. I don't think it's any oversight that these pods are constructed from transparent materials, forcing its two victims to stare helplessly at one another through the upward pull. See, while Mitty's Haku focused on her own aspirations of adventure, Nanachi's Haku was Mitty herself. The exact nature of Nanachi's specific feelings around Mitty are never made clear, but it's clear that Nanachi adores her and finds some comfort in her intensely positive outlook. As we watch or read in excruciating detail, Nanachi and Mitty are yanked upwards to the 5th level in miserable tandem, and Mitty's body and mind are irreparably destroyed, rendering her a small animalistic blob with baseline sentience and a body that can no longer die. It's one of the most famous scenes in Made in Abyss, and I'll guarantee you've seen it if you've ever scratched the surface of discovering the manga. It's the first successful extraction of a living human from the 6th layer, Nanachi, who is plucked back up to level 5, albeit a bit fluffier, that teaches Bondrewd all he needs to know. Whether they're in Orth, the Ido front, or beyond, it's the children that pay the price of the Abyss, and with this knowledge, Bondrewd starts grooming some kids. While I'd argue that the loss of innocence is the theme that serves as the backbone of Made in Abyss's narrative, this loss of innocence always comes about as a result of ambition. Innocence is never merely lost as a result of one child's interest in the Abyss, but rather the simple wishes of children are mercilessly exploited by every adult in this franchise, resulting in their suffering. Either that or neglected while the adults pursue their own ambitions, leaving children behind them to fend for themselves. You can even make a good case for that with Liza, who abandoned Riko as a toddler, essentially orphaning her for the sake of her own interest in what lay beyond the 5th layer of the Abyss. Obviously, it's well up for debate on whether one should sacrifice their life's ambitions for the sake of their child, but by that same merit, it's also debatable that you should choose to have a child when you know that you want to, figuratively, sacrifice your own life to explore beyond an impassable boundary, knowing that child will grow up in an orphanage harvested alive by the city of Orth. After learning what he learned from Nanachi and Mitty, Bondrewd began to create what he referred to as cartridges. As innocuous as that sounds, these items are easily some of the most troubling aspects of Made in Abyss, being that they are small plastic containers that each hold the still living remains of his children that were groomed to love him so that he could steal their value. Essentially, Bondrewd would remove all the limbs, the face, and any organ that wasn't absolutely crucial, and cram what was left into these cartridges. These children would still be alive on some level, basically a brain stem and a few other bits and pieces for several days. This would allow Bondrewd to embark on journeys to lower levels of the Abyss and return through the previously assumed impassable boundary between levels 6 and 5. The curse of the Abyss applied to the children in the cartridges instead of him. And it's not so much the body of the child that matters to Bondrewd, although that is important, considering the Abyss needs a physical body to apply its effects to, but rather it's the Haku. Bondrewd grooms these children, learns about their dreams and aspirations, and becomes their father, so that when they're in the cartridge, it's their Haku that's actually harvested. Reg and Bondrewd fight for a long time in the first proper physical battle of the series. It's a brilliant chapter where the motion and momentum of each hit really comes through with Sakushi's art, and this fight takes place across the boundary of levels 5 and 6. To make this possible, Bondrewd brings several cartridges with him, several cartridges that are exhausted throughout the fight. When they're exhausted, they fall onto the floor and leak whatever mystery fluids are left, and it's at this moment that Bondrewd recalls the dreams of each individual child out loud. This is the moment that often causes people to assume that Bondrewd actually does love these children in his own twisted way, because he remembers their names and clearly remembers their dreams, but this is, as with everything else in the Abyss, just another symptom of Bondrewd's exploitation. He's remembering their dreams because the dreams are value he exchanges with the Abyss in order to be allowed to pass through the boundaries unmolested. And why not use adults? Because he kinda could. See, one very explicit detail of Bondrewd's wider story is the use of an artifact called the Zoaholic. This is a special grade relic, the highest known grade, that looks like a huge plant. The Zoaholic allows the user to implant their mind into into another person's body and take control of them. Using this, Bondrewd has access to a large number of bodies he can switch between when the body he's using dies, supplying him with an infinite source of muscle when he and Reg face off. Moreover, it's revealed that Bondrewd's own white whistle was crafted using his original human body. All white whistles are produced through the sacrifice of a person who meant a lot to the user. Bondrewd, pride and hubris incarnate, a man who cares absolutely nothing for anyone around him, loved himself so much that he split his consciousness and used his original body as his own Haku. Now, there are limitations to the Zoaholic, mainly the fact that splitting one's consciousness too much is an issue, but also bodies that have been inhabited for too long often become shells of their former selves, shells that Bondrewd assigns to manual, repetitive labour around the Ido front to keep them useful. But still, we see that Bondrewd's impression of himself is so high that he can literally make himself his own Haku, something no other characters do. So if he can duplicate his consciousness at a steady rate, and clearly has enough bodies that he could live off his own narcissism forever, he still harvests children. And why is that? Because, as I mentioned before, the wishes of adults are too complex. Those of you familiar with Made in Abyss will probably have been aware that I was working towards this point eventually, however tangentially. As I wrote this script, I was kind of side-eyeing the scroll bar on my Google Doc here, well aware that what I had so far, script and notes combined, was veering well above 30 pages, and Iriyuumi is an entire can of worms, so there'll be a lot more to go. In chapter 48 of the manga, we are introduced to the unfortunately anglicized Ganja Squad, which just sounds like a very arrogant blunt rotation, also referred to as the Genza Squad, which I'll probably default to so I don't sound like an utter fool as I describe them. They were a suicide corps of sorts, a group of outcasts that travel to the Abyss by way of the Star Compass, a relic that Riko actually finds at the start of her journey and then immediately loses again. The Genza Squad arc initially seems like weird filler, especially when we learn the events of this arc occurred roughly 150 years before Riko was even born, but as it pans out, we really do begin to understand just how fundamental this arc was in understanding the Abyss, the history of value, and the origins of Iraburu, a village Riko and Reg stumble upon in the 6th layer. Led by 3 sages, Wazukyan, remember him, Belaf, and Vueko, the Genza Squad sailed far in search of whichever treasure the Star Compass was pointing to, and lost every other ship in the fleet in the process. Upon arriving at what would later become the city of Orth, the squad found a population that spoke an entirely alien language to them. In the universal language of fuck you, however, they handed this squad a sweet little girl named Iriyuumi. Iriyuumi bore tattoos on her back that she would later explain to Vueko, who became her adoptive mother, that she was cast out of the populace for having a, quote, body that was unfit to bear children, an offence that earned her exile into the cruel abyss, where she would surely die alone. Luckily, the squad were happy to take her along with them on a journey none realised was completely doomed. Although they were able to make use of Iriyuumi's sparse knowledge of the abyss, none of them realised that it was impossible to return from the 6th layer. They bumbled down there, excited to discover the legendary City of Gold, and found no such thing. And then they couldn't get back up again. And then they discovered that all the water sources contained a parasite that dissolved many members of the core from the inside, and then they all started dying in slow agony. As numbers dwindled, Wazukyan and the other sages conferred with the very few non-hostile mobs down on the 6th layer, a group of politely sentient robots, interference units, who helped what remained of the core to scavenge for food and, as they soon discovered, relics. It was then that they discovered the Cradle of Desire. The Cradle of Desire is an interesting artifact because, as the interference units explain, it grants wishes, and that immature humans have a higher chance of getting their wish granted as their minds are less complex and less fearful. And all this time, throughout this entire arc, we hear the word wishes over and over and over again, because it's only through the lens of wishes that the squad can understand the concept that we now know in reality is Haku. Now, the way these wishes manifest is directly through your body. You don't take the Cradle of Desire and suddenly have a new dog appear out of nowhere. Only your body can change to fulfill your wish, which, as you can imagine, often results in a monkey's paw situation. The adult squad members that find the Cradle of Desire turn into strange tree-like crystallized structures, and considering this is the fate of suicides in Dante's Inferno, I wonder what their wishes might have been. As Bondrewd reaps the bodies of children who have simple dreams, simple Haku, Iriyuumi, the youngest member of the Corps, is given the Cradle of Desire by Wazukan, who has run out of ideas. She is sacrificed to the Cradle of Desire in his final prayer for help. And as with the children sacrificed for the wealth of Orth, and the children sacrificed for the knowledge of Bondrewd, it is Iriyuumi who is sacrificed for the lives of the Genza Squad. Or more specifically, her children are sacrificed. See, Iriyuumi's wish is to be able to bear children. Growing up in a society that stigmatizes and exiles anyone that can't give birth, it's only natural that this is a direction her wishes would take. The ability to bear children isn't just a tangible wish, but rather for Iriyuumi it represents social acceptance, a life of relative freedom and comfort, being allowed to live, and being allowed to see the sun. But Iriyuumi has other wishes, and the Cradle of Desire grants all of them. She wishes for Vueko to live, certainly, and maybe at this point she still cares about the Genza Squad too, although that will end soon. And so once the Cradle is absorbed into Iriyuumi, we see some very unexpected bodily changes. She becomes a sort of baby mill, this huge blob-shaped creature with multiple tentacles. The hole left by the Cradle forms the hole through which the children are birthed, and every single day she births a new child. She seems kind of delirious in the wake of this change, like she's going a bit mad, which I get, I would too. Every day Iriyuumi births a child that resembles a pet she lost, except the child has no facial features and no internal organs. It lives for a tiny bit, then dies. Every single day, Iriyuumi deals with this grief fresh, and the Genza Squad continue to fall ill from starvation and the mock water they've been drinking. One day, however, it's cured. Everything is suddenly fine. Why? Because Wazukan has realized that the babies Iriyuumi is birthing, when cooked, have healing properties. Yes, her wishes are granted twofold in the cruelest possible way. She can now bear children, only she can't stop bearing children that die immediately. And she also wished for Vueko's health, and she's been given exactly the resources she needs to assure that. Taking the babies away from a desperately grieving Iriyuumi, Wazukan cooks them into a stew that he feeds to the remaining squad members. The mock water symptoms vanish and they return to full health, however horrified they are at what they're willingly partaking in. The demand grows so much that Wazukan begins pulling the still living children from Iriyuumi's arms long after she's lost the ability to speak. Instead, she can only scream. With this, Wazukan keeps the squad alive and cures the symptoms of mock water. Wazukan's intentions are pure, I suppose, like he's not doing this for his betterment, more so for his survival, but even so, he plugs the Cradle of Desire into a little girl who is incapable of understanding nor consenting to it, turns her into an unrecognizable creature who can no longer communicate, and then harvests her children, her greatest wish, in front of her to keep a squad of people alive. Belaf, who can't live with the reality of what they've been eating, comments that they should have been left to starve to death, because to do this, no matter how pure the intention, is evil, and that's valid. Iriyuumi grows so much that she becomes the town of Iriburu, her mouth hole becoming a membraned entrance. As soon as Belaf enters through it, begging Iriyuumi to kill them, they are torn to shreds and reshaped into a Narahate, just like Nanachi, a creature that takes on the appearance of their very innermost essence, showing their personhood on the outside. The same happens for the rest of the Genza Squad, and whosoever else enters Iriburu and offers their body in exchange for immortality. However, those who make this deal can never leave back through the membrane door, and despite the assumptions that Iriyuumi was happy to have sacrificed herself for the squad, Iriburu becomes a holding cell for them. Full of hate and rage, Iriyuumi births her final child, the only living child, Fapta, outside of her membrane with one wish: kill Iriyuumi and the traitors she holds inside her walls. And with this clear theme, we're left with one question. Bondrewd betrays Prushka, Wazukan betrays Iriyuumi, and so who is going to betray Riko? It's notable that Riko would be called to action by something from what may be the 9th level, the Circle of Treachery, if we're retreading the same lines as Inferno, because as we learn, it's not actually Riko's mother who wrote the letter as we originally assumed. Riko's call to action comes in a very literal form. In the early chapters, a balloon rises up from the abyss containing a package from Liza. Weather balloons are the standard method of feeding information back to Orth in Maiden Abyss. Delvers send it up, it's collected by the local government, they read it and dispense information as they consider to be necessary. Since the Curse of the Abyss can send Delvers insane, all information is considered to be a mere rumour unless delivered by the hand of the White Whistles themselves. In this package, 12 years after Riko is born and roughly 10 since Liza made her final dive beyond level 5 of the Abyss, there is a note which reads, "At the bottom of the Abyss, I'll be waiting. As you can see from the way the writing slips off each side of the note, this is like part of a message. The full message is obviously going to be something like, there's certain death at the bottom of the abyss, I'll be waiting at the Burger King up the road instead, but we wouldn't have a story if this was so easy. Riko assumes this note is for her, but I don't think this is ever confirmed. I mean, still, she nabs it and, armed with her robot companion, begins her descent down into the abyss to meet her mother. As the manga begins to hit its stride, we enter level 2, the Forest of Temptation. In here is the Seeker Camp, an observation camp equipped with a huge telescope used as a place of refuge for delvers. As we learn, the curse of the abyss weakens towards the edge of the abyss, in the darkest nooks and crannies, and so these are often places of refuge for delvers who need a little rest before continuing down further into the abyss. This is where Riko and Reg meet Ozan, a white whistle who actually taught Riko's mum how to delve and served as midwife during Riko's birth. Their meeting isn't exactly pleasant, but Ozan delivers a few important snippets of advice to Riko before she and Reg continue down to level 3. Most importantly, the note that Riko assumed was from her mother, a note that was sent up via weather balloon from the lowest pit of the abyss, wasn't written by Liza at all. The rest of the book and all the Delver's notes are from Liza, serving as a cool insight for those up top into what's happening downstairs, but the actual note was not her. So, not a note from Liza, nor a note for Riko. Then who? It's interesting, especially when we see the result of Riko trying to send a note up to Orth from level 6, an attempt that runs tragically short when it is immediately grabbed by some flying monstrosity, mistaking it for prey. Liza's note managed to make it up to the top with no issue from even further down. Why? Well, there are 3 theories. Liza wrote the note, Reg wrote the note, or the Abyss wrote the note. Let's start with Liza, since I believe she's the least likely author. Some people have posited the idea that Liza has been changed enough by the Abyss that she now writes differently, but I don't subscribe to that idea. Handwriting? Maybe? Alphabet? No. I think having Ozan reveal that the note wasn't written by Liza was a huge wrench in the works, both for Riko, but also for our narrative. What reason does Riko now have to trust the bottom of the abyss if her mother might not even be there? I mean, she forges ahead regardless because she's a starry-eyed child who also just really wants to embark on a spectacular journey, but for many people that would be a hard stop. Liza could be changed and waiting for Riko at the bottom, good or evil, and still have the same handwriting. It would be an effective way of lulling the audience and our characters into a collective sense of false security. There's little sense of her operating as our Satan, our betrayer, if she's not even the person who makes the call to action that Riko so blindly follows. Moreover, in flashbacks we see of Liza and Ozan discussing baby Riko before Liza's final dive, Liza says explicitly that she wants to leave Riko to live her own life and make her own decisions. Drawing her down into the abyss, a place she will need training to visit and will never ever be able to escape, negates that wish. So no, I don't think it's Liza. We see plenty of evidence that Liza, despite earning the moniker Annihilator, was a loving mother in some capacity. Sure, she did abandon her daughter to grow up in an orphanage so that she could see the bottom of the abyss. Yes, that's definitely a mark on her record, but there's more to it. During the expedition for the Unheard Bell, the expedition she gave birth to Riko during, Liza gave the bell up so that she could ensure Riko was transported safely home. Considering the power of a greater artifact can swing the power balance of an entire country, Liza spat in the face of her military orders just to prioritize a daughter that she would later, for all intents and purposes, abandon. No, God forbid women have hobbies. But what I'm trying to suggest is, I don't see Liza now trying to lure Riko to the bottom of the abyss. Secondly, a lot of people seem to think that it's Reg, being that Ozan comments the handwriting isn't Liza's. It uses old netherglyphs with no simplification, it's written in large and crooked penmanship, and although it appears to be written on paper, it's actually written on an artifact that cannot be ripped no matter how hard Ozan tries, which is weird, considering it is clearly part of a bigger message. I don't really think it's Reg either. Some stipulate that he wrote it on behalf of Liza, that she was changed so much by the abyss that she needed help, but again, I don't agree. Reg was sent up by Liza to fetch Riko for whatever reason, and the weather balloon arrived shortly after he did. Wouldn't he have the note on his person? Rather, I feel like Reg and Liza needed to reach Riko before the note did, probably to stop her from entering the abyss, and clearly that worked wonders. Reg made it but lost his memories along the way, instead accidentally serving as the best possible guide for Rico, a cyborg containing the soul of Rico's childhood pet, Reg the dog. What? Oh yeah, put a pin in that. I don't have much to say on it. Our final potential culprit, at least of the culprits we know, is the abyss itself. Sure, there might be some Darth What's-His-Name who shows up at the 11th hour to randomly be our final villain, and if there is, I guess I'll go fuck myself, but of our available pool of suspects, the abyss is most likely to be our caller to action. Inscribing old runes onto an unknown relic, making absolutely sure that the message reached the top of the abyss, a near impossibility. Rico's connection to her mother might be two-pronged. Drawn to follow Liza as she is, there's another parent waiting for her at the bottom of the abyss, and that's the abyss itself. But why? Personally, I don't know. But considering the haunting violence we've seen time and time again in this series, I don't imagine it's good. I think it's going to be awful. Reddit user SkySong13 posted a big fat post on this topic actually, providing an interpretation linking closely to those themes of motherhood. Observing the trend of the infallible bond of self-sacrifice between mothers and daughters of Made in Abyss, SkySong13 suggested that Rico's call to action might find a more troubling end than she, and we the audience, hope for her. In the post, SkySong links this to Rico's birth. Alongside the unknown nature of the abyss, whether it's sentient, whether it's malevolent, why it's even there, SkySong highlights the 2,000-year cycle we see take place. Those praying skeletons I mentioned earlier, we see those skeletons crop up in intervals down the internal walls of the abyss. 2,000-year intervals. Every 2,000 years, something happens which causes a mass extinction event of the city circling the abyss, leaving no evidence beyond these praying skeletons. Incredibly, the 2,000-year interval is upon us, and no one has thought to evacuate. People in Orth are dying mysteriously on their birthdays unless taken out to sea, in a boat obviously, and Rico has mysteriously been called to the bottom of the abyss. Is Rico filling the shoes of humanity as the abyss's sacrificial child? In this case, the assumption is that Rico is a sacrifice, either to the abyss or to Liza. In a flashback, we see Liza speaking to Ozan. During the conversation, she refers to Rico as her most precious thing, not out and out saying it clearly, but obviously setting up Rico as Liza's Haku. It's actually in Iriyuumi, which acts as a microcosm of the abyss itself, that we learn more about this value system and how it works. Upon arriving in Iriyuumi, Rico's pet Mania is taken from her hands by a curious villager, who promptly begins playing far too rough with Mania, squeezing her and badly injuring her. When Rico begins to desperately cry, Kaja, a villager, asks, "What's the value? Irreplaceable?" When Rico confirms this to be true, the villager Ma is pulled into the air and appropriate value is taken from them, including Ma's own stuffed animal, which vanishes out of thin air, and quite a lot of Ma's skin. The matter is then considered to be resolved. In fact, Iriyuumi being full of Narahate immortals means that value is taken directly from the physical form, trades often involving legs and hair and whatnot. While barbaric, Iriyuumi merely serves as a one-to-one allegory to Orth's own macabre value-based system, and an allegory for the abyss as a whole. As we learned, there are 5 levels of value apportioned to aspects of the abyss. These values are actually branded onto the physical currency of Iriyuumi, which Rico is given during her stay there. We are never told whether a denizen of Iriyuumi actually figured this out, or if this was merely coincidence. Firstly, we have she. She is the initial value, the beginning of desire. It also means like a modest wish. Think like cake ingredients. It's milk, eggs, flour, etc. They're useful on their own a bit, but they're very common and they are better when combined. Secondly, we have Ku. Ku is the accumulation of value beyond mere fragments. In this metaphor, I suppose it would be all of the ingredients mixed together in a bowl, ready to be baked. Again, a common item and low effort, but a combination of things. Third would be Gutsu. Gutsu is the solidification of a wish, a crystallization of value. It means purity, and this would be the baked cake. Fourth is Mei. Mei is extraordinary value, the liberation of a wish. This would be if we put the cake in a gift box. It's not just the physical embellishment of the cake itself, but the social and emotional value placed upon it. Fifth is Haku. Haku is the highest value, the manifestation of a wish. It means the shape of a soul. that which is irreplaceable. In this metaphor, our Haku is the person we bake the cake for, and the bond that we have that strengthens because of it. We have 5 levels of value, 5 whistle types, and most importantly, 5 survivable layers of the abyss. The Haku is the ultimate level of value that we know, referring not just to a body but to a bond. And when we ascend the first 5 levels of the abyss, the curse of the abyss isn't placing arbitrary symptoms on the delver. Rather, it is extracting value related to those 5 levels, the delver unwittingly taking part in those aforementioned transactions, the constant flow of value, and the implicit law of the abyss. Anything that must be taken must be paid back, and visiting levels 1 through 5 demand a price to return. Although the characters refer to it as the curse of the abyss, I think a more fitting name would be the cost of the abyss. The reason why ascending from level 6 causes death is because level 5, the Haku, the body, is insufficient payment to return. 6 is Haku plus 1. The value expected by the abyss is something no delver can fulfill alone. Perhaps descending beyond level 7 takes a similar cost, and perhaps this is why Riko, Liza's Haku, is being lured to the bottom. Maybe Liza wants to use Riko to get further down into the abyss. Maybe she has been changed by her time there, or maybe it's the abyss itself. There's a bittersweetness to the people on top of the abyss in Orth, who Akihito spends a lot of time setting up and characterizing for the sheer purpose of making you feel like shit about them when you leave. Riko is gone by chapter 10, and at 67 chapters, this is a long story that you move vertically down through parallel to the direction of the abyss. At some point you feel like you turn back and look up, back to the entrance of the abyss, like up from inside a well. Although we see occasional scenes featuring characters we met in those early chapters, we are also reminded frequently of the time dilation that occurs in the abyss. In fact, we're even told the people who wait for you will die, which sounds more active than it is. A few weeks in the lowest rungs of the abyss can equate to months, if not years, on the surface, so the further we go down, the more it sits in the back of our mind that people above are dying. I think this effort made to carefully characterize people that Riko will probably never see again was very effective. Shiggy is a quiet little nerd who loves pranks. Nato is a flustered guy who seems to have a bit of a thing for Riko that it doesn't appear she returns. Leader is quietly supportive. Habo and his wife are the closest thing Riko seems to have to actual parents. I think it shows what Riko stands to lose by entering the abyss. She has people she knows and possibly loves. She has companions, a life above the surface. Entering the abyss is tantamount to leaving Eden. Things are flawed, even cruel on the surface. This society is fundamentally unjust and indifferent to its citizens, especially its children. But perhaps even that is better than the maw of hell, in which a slow, agonizing death is all but assured. Life may not have been perfect for Riko, but there were people she cared about, and by descending into the abyss, she is, knowingly or not, condemning them to her everlasting absence. Those people will die never knowing what happened to Riko, just like she does not know what happened to her mother. She is like a soldier going off to war, sent on a campaign that is nothing but a meat grinder. Essentially, the further down you go into the actual comic, the more bittersweetly you remember the levels above that you'll never see again, because Riko, Reg, and the team change forever in the abyss. The most prevailing theme you'll ever hear about Made in Abyss is that it's an allegory for a loss of innocence, and I agree. We see time and time again that the abyss is a metaphor for exactly that. Some of them are more overt, some of them more implicit. Leaving the relative safety of the city of Orth to go on a suicide mission, each level being a worse place than the last, but being forced to descend anyway since it's literally impossible to go back up to safer levels, Loss of Innocence. Riko immediately dropping her star compass down a waterfall on the first level, losing the pretty item she was going to use to carry her to the bottom of the abyss, Loss of Innocence. Seeing the monsters first in written notes on the handbook, and then facing them in the flesh only to find they are 10 times more horrifying than you could have ever imagined. Understanding that this is no fantasy, this isn't a Pokemon game, these things will kill you, Loss of Innocence. The legendary Garden of the Flowers of Resilience actually turning out to be a hive of newly migrated amaranthine deceptor bugs who attack nearby living beings and implant themselves into their bodies, keeping them alive as tortured incubators for their larvae, Loss of Innocence. Nanachi and Mitty being irreparably physically changed by the horrors of level 6, trusting children being turned into cartridges for Bondrude's ambition, Loss of Innocence. Riko losing the function in her left hand after her first proper fight in the abyss against the first thing that very reasonably could have killed her in a second, Loss of Innocence. Iriyuumi wishing simple wishes, only for her body to turn into a baby mill to sustain a group of people who didn't even care if she consented, only to mutate into a prison full of the people who used those simple wishes to betray her and cannibalize her children, Loss of Innocence. A loss of innocence doesn't have to be negative either. During her time in Iriyuumi, Iriburu, the town is besieged by a huge monster that rips the denizens to shreds, getting closer and closer to Riko, who is alone. Without Reg or Nanachi to help her, Riko has to deal with a problem by herself for the first time in her life, and so she cuts off her hair and trades that value with a fellow Iriburu villager for a taxi away. That's a loss of innocence. She is maturing, she's growing. There are hundreds of examples of characters losing their innocence across this series in so many different ways. Some are overt, spanning entire chapters, or the concept of the book itself, whereas some are more subtle, happen in a moment, or are a little bit more allegorical. Either way, once you start looking for moments that mark a loss of innocence, you will be shouting them out the whole time. You could make a drinking game based on isolating the constant happenings that change these children forever. And it's at this point in the video, especially for those of you who are watching it because you're interested in the franchise and perhaps haven't seen it, I want to point something really key out to you. At no point throughout this entire video have I needed to mention the lolly bullshit to make a point. Casting your mind back over my descriptions of the price of progress, of ambition versus innocence, Iriyuumi and her children, Riko's call to action, I've had to explain an extensive amount of the in-universe rules and concepts to be able to make the points I'm making, often having to recite a good chunk of plot just to ensure that you are on the same page as me. But have I ever needed to mention the fact that the children are stripped naked, hung from ropes, and whipped by the orphanage if they steal relics, shown prominently for the viewer? Did I need to mention that we also see this happen to Maruk? The fact that Riko, quote, probes Reg with a ruler while he's unconscious in an act of genuine sexual assault? Did I have to mention that Reg's penis is constantly being grabbed and exposed and stared at by other occasionally adult characters who talk about it and make him uncomfortable? That Prushka sees a penis and refers to it as a pupper pole? Did I need to mention that we see a living toilet licking Riko clean after she takes a dump? Did I mention the scene that's clearly visually supposed to look like an attempted rape of Riko while she wanders the wrong way in Iriburu? The obviously dodgy moment when Nanachi tries Riko's food for the first time and does that weird hentai face? That the children often bathe fully naked together, drawn in full clear detail, covered in steam and dripping water? Did I mention the twins, Shirumi and Mine, met in the most recent chapters, who have had both legs and arms amputated and crawl all over each other in the bath and writhe nakedly for each other, trying to arouse Reg and by extension the audience? What about the lolly art Tsukushi adds to the extra little bits at the end of the book? Not really. When we discuss the metaphor of loss of innocence in Made in Abyss, Tsukushi tends to write them in three parts. There's a clear visual representation, a metaphorical allegory, and then a consequence, i.e. what this now means for the characters going forward. Loss of innocence, as a mechanic, requires these. You need to show the transition, you need to show what triggers the transition, and you need to show that innocence is lost afterwards. Let's take Nanachi and Mitty for example. With them, we have a clear visual representation. Mitty is completely dissolved as a human by the abyss, and Nanachi is furrified, sporting a new adorable design of haunting origins. We have a metaphorical allegory. Mitty's physical self represents the magnitude to which her mind has been turned to soup from the trauma of what happened to her, and Nanachi's furry self represents the fact that they were not able to escape unscathed either, physically or mentally. And we have our consequence. Mitty's life and all of her dreams have been destroyed by one random shithead's pursuit of knowledge, turning her into a blob that isn't even really aware of what's happening, can't communicate, and lacks basic sentience. Nanachi, on the other hand, now walks away changed by the horrors of what they've seen, bearing the heavy weight of survivor guilt and the newfound knowledge of the lengths Bondrewd will go to for his ambition. You can isolate these 3 points for every tangible loss of innocence in Made in Abyss. Tsukushi is very good at writing lingering trauma, which is ironic, considering his clear proclivities for art featuring children. For example, let's take the orphanage punishment as our loss of innocence. You'll notice very quickly that we fall short. None of the 3 points feature here. So in this example, Riko steals a relic, Riko is caught or detected in some way, and Riko is punished by being strung up naked and left hanging from the ceiling overnight. Tsukushi doesn't focus so much on the theft and capture as he does the punishment, which obviously gets a big visual focus. So why doesn't this work as a loss of innocence? Well, mainly because Riko is unchanged before and after the punishment. She steals relics and wants to go adventuring regardless of how many times she undergoes this weird draconian punishment. Her outlook isn't changed by this, and she just takes the punishment in a kind of clueless, innocent, childish way where she doesn't even mind that much, and Tsukushi has an excuse to draw a full pager of a sweaty, screaming child tied to the ceiling in what is clearly some kind of suspension shibari sex rope setup. Same for the twins, whose bath is a scenario that could have been swapped out for anything. Same for the toilet, which Riko never even learns is sentient. Same for Riko's implied assault, which she completely brushes off and forgets about a few seconds later. When you see fans of Made in Abyss trapped in their constant war over these scenes, the biggest argument you'll see from folks in favour of it is that they are there to symbolise a loss of innocence. To remove the lolly art would be to destroy the meaning of this story. They're thematically important, guys. Normally I wouldn't support this, but it's clearly there to symbolise Riko's loss of innocence. But, spoilers, it's not. Ironically, these are the scenes when innocent isn't lost, because it is the innocence that is being sexualised. A 9-year-old girl tied up naked to the ceiling isn't having a moment of, my innocence is being lost. She's like, oh wowee, guess I'm on the ceiling again in my birthday suit. The innocence is the product that's being sold. The innocence is what's being exploited. The innocence is the appeal. For Riko to actually lose her innocence in this moment, to be changed by her experiences, would be for her to mature. And I think we all know why fans of this particular genre don't want that to happen. The story itself already symbolises a loss of innocence, drifting deeper into a pit, never being able to return, seeing more and more horrors every time you choose to step down a level. It already symbolises a loss of innocence. My advice? Just admit it's for titillation, and maybe hand your hard drive into the local police. The Made in Abyss subreddit is extremely split on the topic of Tsukushi's weird interests. Anime fandoms are made up of all sorts of people of all ages, but I find that fandoms like this do tend to attract some real interesting individuals, usually those that don't get out a lot and don't see a problem with the sexualized depiction of children. Probably because, in my most generous interpretation, they don't get out often enough to meet any real children, therefore such situations are purely hypothetical to them, and I emphasize generous interpretation because the alternative is far worse. If you draw lolicon to make me uncomfortable, you've still drawn lolicon. Still, while I expected a hive of scum and villainy, the Made in Abyss subreddit isn't the Marianas Trench of pedophiles I assumed it would be. There's a lot of good conversation, funny memes, and reasonable discussion, especially in the more recent years. A lot of people approach Made in Abyss similarly. They find the premise great, the art style brilliant, and the gratuitous creep shit to be an inclusion the manga would do far better to leave behind. It's genuinely a good collection of people, and I'm sorry I judged you unnecessarily. Still, I'm sure they'd understand, especially if you go and look at the older posts. Acceptance of the author's proclivities tend to fall into one of three groups. In group 1, you get the people who hate him for it, and cannot engage with the manga on the basis of how uncomfortable Akihito's art makes them, which is fair enough. In group 2, you get the people who acknowledge the creepy behaviour whilst also enjoying the media on their own terms, often openly criticising it and bemoaning the lack of narrative quality that is sacrificed with the inclusion of these images. And in group 3, you just get the denialists, ranging between the eyebrow-raising, technically he's not a paedophile, he's a lolicon school of thought, through to the, it's supposed to make you uncomfortable, it's dark fantasy, to the trying to remove those scenes would be censorship, but if I see a gay character, I will leave a pipe bomb in an amusement park. The arguments are brimming with cringe and so very, very readable. Ultimately, I hope I've communicated to you what a brilliant franchise this is, and could be. Made in Abyss is a story absolutely leaking with allegory, told in a rivetingly unique, compelling way. Tsukushi's character designs are second to none. His monster designs are geniusly executed, and his twists and turns are some of the most compelling I've seen in manga today. And I hope I've communicated to you effectively enough why this franchise is absolutely marred by the creator and his clearly disturbed interest in children, because I don't think I've ever recommended this to anybody, and I don't think I ever could.